Vernomatic Productions.
Are you ready?
Live from the Metal Mayhem Studios in Rochester, New York.
We are gold.
And heard around the world by metalheads just like you. This is Metal Mayhem ROC.
Heavy metal music.
Your weekly dose of metal music, interviews, album reviews, news, and more. Want to be part of the show? Send us a message through our website, metalmayhemroc.com, or hit us up on Facebook and Twitter. Search Metal Mayhem ROC.
It's getting nice and heavy.
Now, welcome our hosts, John the Vernomatic Verno, and direct from New Jersey, Metal Walt.
Good evening, everybody. As always, Thursday's new content drops. Wishing everyone a happy and healthy new year as 2023 is underway. We're in the third week, and tonight we are celebrating what would have been Edward Van Halen's 68th birthday. Hard to believe that it's been 2.5 years since Eddie's been gone, and every day I think of Eddie, I think of his playing. I listen to his music constantly. So tonight we decided to celebrate. And what better way to celebrate than have a Van Halen discussion? Just a minute, I'm going to bring Metal Walt on. He's down in Jersey. But we have Steve Rosen. Now, Steve's the author of the book Tone Chaser, Understanding Edward, My 26-Year Journey with Edward Van Halen. Now, Steve, he's a rock and roll journalist, started in the early 70s, wrote for all those guitar Bibles, Guitar Player, Guitar World. He's written books on Jeff Beck, Ozzy, Jimmy Page. We have Steve on here, and we're going to talk about all this stuff. Great antidotes. We discussed Ed's relationship with the band, Michael Anthony, David Lee Roth, Ted Templemen. We cover stuff like his meetings with Richie Blackmore and Jimmy Page. You'd be surprised to find out what happened with those incidences, and just overall Eddie Van Halen anecdotes. But let's bring Metal Walt on. Walt, what's going on, man? How you doing?
Hey, Verno, how's it going today?
Yeah, it's going as good as it could be. Observing Eddie Van Halen's birthday. Would have been 68. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's always a reminder of the gift we got with him as an artist, and that we should be appreciative of the material he left us, even though leaving us at a young age.
Yeah, it's well documented. My favorite guy. So, Walt, what's your take from this interview? We just did it. It's nice and fresh. What'd you take out of it?
Well, this is not your typical author, just rehashing a timeline of Eddie and Van Halen's career. This is not that. This is a guy that there was a mystery to his relationship with Eddie. I don't think he expected it to form and grow the way that it did. And it also kind of flamed out. And you could tell from speaking to the author, he wasn't really sure why his relationship ended. But the bottom line about it is this was this archivist that had a reputation from the industry of interviewing guitarists for magazines, and he linked up with Eddie and became a very trusted source for Eddie disclosing a lot of things. And what was amazing is Steve archived these conversations on cassettes. He has like 30 hours of conversations with Eddie, and he pulled from the best of them to make this book. So it's definitely a unique twist on his relationship with Eddie.
A minimum of 30 hours, he said. Said 30 to 40 to 50 hours spanning 26 years. Again, it's a 600-page book. Thing is huge, and I barely have scratched the surface, and I've been reading it for like 6 or 7 weeks. So that's what's coming up. Just want to remind you to get up to our website, metalmayhemroc.com, and sign up for our newsletter, join our community, download some past shows, rate and review, and subscribe. So, Metal Walt, we will see you soon. I'm the Vernomatic. This is Metal Mayhem ROC. Enjoy the interview. Happy birthday, Eddie. We love you and miss you.
Hi, this is Steve Rosen, author of that unbelievable new book, Tone Chaser, Understanding Edward, My 26-Year Journey with Edward Van Halen. And you're listening to Metal Mayhem ROC with the Vernomatic, Metal Walt, and Steve Rosen. Yeah.
Steve Rosen, welcome to Metal Mayhem, my friend. Let me introduce you to my co-host, Metal Walt from New Jersey.
How you doing, guys? I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Nice to meet you, Steve.
Thank you so much, Metal Walt.
Okay, this book, it's 600 pages. It's thick, it's heavy. Some days I don't have to do curls at the gym because it's so big.
There you go.
And it's one of those books where I'm going to be rereading it for years to come.
Wow.
The attention to detail, it's fantastic. Again, before we dive right into it, let's get a little glimpse into your career.
Quick dive. I actually started writing for my high school newspaper. I had the first music column at Culver City High School. I would go out to clubs, I'd review shows, and I got a taste for it. I loved doing that. Got out of high school, went to UCLA for a year, ostensibly to study journalism and English. And if you read the book, you know what kind of a nightmare that was. So I thought, all right, fuck it. I want to be a writer. I want to write for magazines. I want to meet bands. I want to meet guitar players. So I started writing, got some things printed in the LA Free Press, which is like an alternative paper from back in the day. And then you use that as a stepping stone. And, I got some little pieces in Cream and Circus. And then I got a couple small pieces in Rolling Stone. Became a regular contributor for Guitar World in '84. Was a regular contributor to Guitar Player beginning in '73. And, man, you just branch out. And ultimately, I was writing for a lot of foreign magazines, Japanese magazines, European magazines. Along the way, I'd written some books previous to the Van Halen book. Wrote a book on Prince, Springsteen. Wrote a book on Ozzy. Wrote a book on Bad Company and Free. Wrote a book on Randy Rhoads. And in fact, the first book I ever wrote and the first biography on him was Jeff Beck, called The Beck Book, that came out in Japan in 1978. And we all know Jeff passed recently, which is horrific. So that's kind of a quick dive.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on that the passing of Jeff Beck, because learned in the book that was your first feature article when you started with Guitar Player, and it was a cover shot. So condolences to the passing of someone that meant a lot to you in your history.
Yeah, man, absolutely. I've loved Jeff Beck, since I was, I don't know, man, Heart Full of Soul and Over and the Sun Was Down, and I was playing guitar, playing the songs in bands. There was just something special about him the first time I'd heard him. I thought he was the greatest who ever lived. Notwithstanding Edward, who I believe, and there's a differentiation here, I believe Edward was the most influential guitar player who ever lived. I think that Jeff Beck was the greatest guitar player who ever lived, which isn't to say that Jeff also wasn't incredibly influential and Edward wasn't obviously also an amazing guitar player. But yes, man, that was my first story for Guitar Player. Became a cover and began what would be a 5-year run with Guitar Player. Those were fun days, man. Those were great days.
To be on the fly on the wall back in the 70s. I absolutely would love to be there. But yeah. Today it is the birthday of Eddie Van Halen. He would have been 68 years old. But Eddie, besides being an influential guitarist, it's what he did behind the scenes with his amps and his guitars. And to this day, that's what's living on with the EVH brand with Wolfgang and Matt Burke, his longtime assistant. So, but there's so much to dive into this. Let's start at the beginning, because my co-host Metal Walt, he's very good at what he does. He did some, he did some, quick crash coursing. Walt, any early comments on what you have heard about this book, and any questions for Steve?
Yeah. So Steve, again, congratulations on this magnificent publication. I will say, yes, when I received the PDF version of it, I'm flipping through it and I'm going, wow, okay, chapter 2, 3, 4, 45, 62. Yeah. We're up to page 625. I said, man, Verno's got the hard copy. I got the virtual copy. But anyway, you know what? My first reaction was, this book is unique, right? But you know what? I'm sure there's hundreds and hundreds of books out there about Van Halen or Edward himself and articles written. But in your own words, like, what did you set out to make this book different than just another typical Van Halen history book or an Eddie Van Halen biography of sorts? What makes this one stand on its own?
Well, that's a great question. By default, because I don't know if I set out to consciously try and write a book that was different than, Brad Talinsky's book and Chris Gill's book, which is fantastic. Paul Brannigan's book, which I thought was really good. Paul's also a superb writer. Greg Renoff's book earlier. Just by default, well, I mean, the broad answer is I had a relationship with Edward that nobody else ever had. Mm-hmm. And that's just the reality of it. So, in and of its own, coming from that viewpoint, the book was going to be different. Look, I know those guys, I know that Brad spent a fair amount of time with Ed, but it was not like Ed lived, 10 minutes away and he was hanging out with them for the better part of almost 3 decades. So that in itself was going to make the book different. I also, at a point in time, as you suggest, I'm writing. I'm like 100,000 words in. I'm 150,000 words in. And typically that's about the length, 175,000 words of a typical biography, that they typically run. So I'm 175,000 words in that, and I'm not even, 10 years into the relationship. I'm thinking, oh my God, this book's going to be, 3,000 pages long. I'll have to do it, 4 separate volumes. So I thought, you know what? Fuck it. It's my book. I'm going to make it as long as I want to make it. You talk about the detail. I did not know when I was writing this if people were going to react to the detail in that way. I thought, man, am I just getting crazy here and just, taking, 5 pages to describe, the way the cigarette smoke was curling around his head. But you know what? I wanted the book to read like fiction, as if I had made this story up. So it gave me a chance to flex my writing skills. I could be a creative writer. I could say whatever I wanted. I didn't have to follow a format. It wasn't a strict chronology. It wasn't a discussion about guitars and amps. So I think there were a lot of things that really made it different. It wasn't going to be a photo-centric book. There's like 6 or 8 pages of photos. Nothing great, but they kind of reflect what the book was. It reflected, kind of my background. So I think there were a lot of pieces that made the book different.
So, Steve, just tell us, though, about the friendship. Like, when did it start? How did it start? And how did it evolve? Because in the title, it says, whatever it is, 26 years of a longstanding friendship. Like, how did you meet him? And then you're probably one of a kind that you've maintained a friendship and a communication with him over a long duration, which, you read of a lot of others that he was a very elusive kind of guy, right? So how did that go down?
I think about that a lot. And I think in the beginning of, I think it's chapter 1, I write about, well, what if I hadn't gone to the Whiskey a Go-Go that night in June 1977 to see Chief Trent record a live record? I don't really believe in destiny or it's pre-planned, but it's like, for those pieces to come together like that, man, it just, maybe there was something that worked there. I don't know. So I'm there on a Friday night. I'm there with my brother. And Michelle Meyer, the girl who booked the Whiskey, was someone I had met. I was playing in a band. She would book my band around, and she was just this fantastic girl. And so she saw me there, and she said, there's somebody you have to meet. And to be honest, coming from Michelle, I thought it was probably somebody special, but I had met a lot of very cool guitar players by 77. I had interviewed Richie Blackmore and John McLaughlin and John Entwistle and Wishbone Ash, who I loved. I mean, I had met a lot of guys, I'm not saying that I was jaded by 77 for using the career, but it's like, oh God, if it's some local guy, and he might be a great guitar player, but it's like, I trust Michelle. So she brings my brother and I upstairs, and there's this guy standing there, and I'm trying to remember if I recognized him or I didn't. I'm pretty sure I recognized him, though, and this is key, I have never seen Van Halen play. I had never heard this Edward Van Halen play guitar. So I didn't know who he was. I just knew that, oh, well, this is a guy whose band has got signed to Warner Brothers Records, which I thought was fucking unbelievable. And he was a band that was playing around town. So I thought, he's got to be a good guitar player. So we just started a conversation. Michelle introduced us. We started talking. And as my brother described afterwards, man, it was just like talking to one of our buddies, man. There was a distinct connection with this shared love of Clapton and Cream and Jeff Beck and Blackmore. I knew a lot about Eric Clapton. I knew a lot about Richie Blackmore because I loved those guys. I knew a lot about Cream. I knew more than most people. And I don't say that in any egotistical way. It's just that that's what I love. So I listened to all the music. I read about it, such as I was to read, obviously pre-computer. So would look up magazine articles. So I knew a lot. But Edward, his comments were so incisive, and he was talking about Eric's playing. I thought, oh my God, this guy really gets you, So it was like I was enamored with the guy. So we meet, we get along. He gives me his phone number. I'm trying to remember my chronology. About a year later, I interview him for the first time. It's a phone interview. He's amazing. Now, this is really key. I don't think he remembers meeting me. I don't think Edward remembered from one moment to the next what we did. And it was a strange thing. At first, I thought, well, how the fuck do you not remember meeting me? Not that he should have met me, but it's like, how many journalists did you meet at the whiskey, Ed? You know what I mean? But I came to understand that she just never remembered that stuff. Following year 78, I met him again, Day of the Green, and that amazing photo on the back cover that Niels Lozauer took was taken there that day. And again, I don't think he remembered me. You talk about the friendship, how to develop. I can't tell you like, oh, it was the third time we met and the, second interview for Guitar World when it was like, it tipped the scales and we became friends. I think we became friends the moment I met him the first night at the whiskey. I believe that. And I think if Ed were here, I think if you'd asked him if he could have remembered that, then he would have said the same thing. So it was just one of those things that happened. How and why do you become friends with somebody? I don't know, man. A shared interest, a chemical thing. I don't know.
Excuse me, Steve, before we go and discuss 78, 79, Van Halen at the time, they were huge in the local scene. Yeah. You never heard of them or seen them? Were you living in the South California area? How did you not see the band?
Dude, I do not know. I was living up on Weepaw Way, Laurel Canyon. I was literally 10 minutes from the whiskey. I was at the whiskey 5 times a week, 4 times a week. I was at the Starwood when they were playing. Here is the thing. I had heard of Van Halen. Everybody in Hollywood, maybe everybody, even regionally, had heard of Van Halen. But all I knew of them was that it was this local band that had signed a big deal on Warner Brothers. I knew they played the circuit. I knew they had played Gazzarri's, and they'd moved up. They'd moved up to the whiskey. And I thought, oh my God, these guys are playing the whiskey. Because me and my small way, I had my band, and I am in no way trying to compare myself with them. But I would have cut off an arm to have played the whiskey, or even the Starwood. I was playing like Madame Wong's East and West, which were primarily punk clubs at the time, pretty well known. But, I play on a Sunday night, and there'd be 8 people in the audience. 7 of them were my buddies. But in answer to your question, somewhere, and I don't know where, I must have seen one of those early shows. I know It was not before I met him, however. And I'd looked up, God bless the internet. You can look and you can see calendars of the whiskey. Even though there's no mention of that cheap trick date, which I looked over and over for, trying to figure out. I have to find out the date of when I first met Edward, and I finally found it by a reference in one of my own interviews. Anyway, I think it's that first phone interview. Edward talks about the bomb that he used to put his effects in. And my response is, and I'm thinking about it now, my brother brought this up, my response is, oh, that's what that is for. Now, I think about it, my response is, oh, that's what that's for, as if I had seen the bomb and I knew what it was. But on the other hand, I could have just been sort of responding to his question. Oh, that's what that was for. Like, oh, that's why you smoke. Not knowing the reason. So, I think I must have seen them play live at the whiskey early on. Then I think, no, I never did. So, I don't know, man. But I know I never saw him play before meeting him that first time. That I'm positive.
Like that farewell Pasadena Civic Center show that they did before they went on tour. Any of that? Nothing?
Nothing, man. Certainly never those bigger shows. Strange. I mean, I don't know how I could have missed them. Even the Starwood. I mean, I was there. I swear to you, I was there 4 nights a week. Seeing every local band and Y&T, who opened that night for them when they were signed. I mean, I must have seen them a dozen times. Wolfgang, I think they wasn't that early Autograph, Steve Lynch. I was seeing all those bands there. Black Oak, my God, I'd seen them so many times. They used to open for every local band. I don't know how I missed them. The only thing I could think of is that maybe a lot of times they were playing with punk bands. I was not a fan of punk. That's like, oh, man, I'm not going to go out to see, well, even though I might want to see Van Halen, I'm not going to go, if there's a punk band. And the other thing, and this is kind of stupid, but the truth is, I was on labels. I was on the list at that time for record companies. So I was getting like comms. I would get tabs. So it's like, before Van Halen was signed, it was like, if I'm going to go see him, I would have to pay to go see them. And not trying to be a snob. It's like, oh, man, I'm not going to go. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So who knows why things happen. But that, weird stuff. Yeah, man, I just, somehow I missed them.
It's funny, Steve. Many years later, I remember when I was cutting my teeth with Van Halen and a lot of the bands, late 80s, mid to late 80s. I'm 52, so it took me a while to catch up. I was a big bootleg collector, right? And I know those Starwood tapes showed up a lot through the 80s and early 90s. A lot of the Van Halen demos, the Gene Simmons demos, and a lot of shows off of those soundboards from those Starwood shows would pop up where Van Halen was doing. I remember they did a totally killer version of Gene Genie, David Bowie's Gene Genie. So it's nice to know that those archives still exist from back in the day. But Steve, I want to move on with this because it's fascinating when you go through your book. You had this communication with him from that point in time in 78 or so all the way to early 2000s.
Yeah.
And my first reaction was, man, how is Steve fact checking himself? How does he remember all of this stuff? There's no way. Like, is he have a photographic memory? And then John comes to say, no, Walt, like he archived these things. So tell us how you archive these conversations.
This is funny. Tell them about the equipment you used back in 79.
Exactly. Well, oh, God. Honestly, I was late in getting a computer. I was still using an electric typewriter. My brother said, you're out of your mind. You're getting a computer. Because he was in that world, man. Let's start with the gear. And I wish I could remember where I got it. It was I don't even remember the make. It was like a GE or something cassette player. Was so old and so bad the capstans would make these noises, and Edward comments on it. Actually, I think he comments on it twice. And I'm so embarrassed because as I'm listening to the tapes and I'm writing the book, I'm going, oh my God, he must have heard those sounds every time we talk, and he's never said anything. And I feel like a total amateur. So they go like, sometimes they get higher pitched, depending on if it was the beginning of the tape and how much tension was on the capstan, or the end of the tape, they change in pitch, and because the microphone, was like kind of sometimes close to the tape recorder, the microphone was picking up all these sounds. So these tapes would have these sounds of the cassette player on them, and they would drown out, whoever I was talking to. And trust me, it wasn't just Van Halen, Pete Townsend and Peter Frampton and Stevie Wonder. And I mean, interviews that, I cringe in this day. The equipment was horrific. In my mind, I'm thinking, well, I'll probably be how long am I going to do this? I thought, hey, man, if I could do this for a couple of years and interview bands, I'd be happy. So it was partly that, partly you never think about the other side of it. I was only recording so I could write the stories and listen back and transcribe the tapes. Who would ever think? I didn't, and I don't think anybody else ever did, would ever think, oh my God, years later, it's the audio that's going to have the value. I know guys, big-time journalists who recorded over the cassettes, never recorded. They took notes. So, trying to get back to your question, I always had an archivist mentality. I was always a documentarian of sorts. So from the very first interview I did, so I recorded over the first interview I did, which was Joe Cocker, but that's another story. I kept all my interviews. I had them on cassettes. I met a guy, Dave Jeffress. He took the originals and dumped them to CDs. So I now had to send everything with CD, and I subsequently had everything dumped to hard drives. And more precise answer, Walt, honestly, what bothers me is that my memories weren't more complete. Basically, I was going off of what was on the tapes. So I'd listen to that first interview. I thought, okay, that's 78. Then I'd listen to the next one, which would have been dated, Van Halen. And I thought I dated every cassette I ever did. Well, I didn't. Some I did, some I didn't. So I had I don't know, man, a dozen cassettes that weren't dated that said Edward Van Halen. So I'd literally pick a cassette, listen to it, and go, oh my God, he's talking about the third tour, or a track off an album, or a guitar, and I go, oh my God, that's 83, and I kind of reverse engineer and know, okay, that's the tape from 83, so I could write that chapter in 1983, and I tried to find the month, when, what kind of space we're talking about, and really, man, I wrapped my brain as hard as I could. It took me weeks and weeks and weeks to figure out the date when we first met at the Whiskey. And I finally heard, oh, Ed, don't you remember, man, we met at the Whiskey when Cheap Trick was recording live? I got, oh my God, there it is. Then it took me a long time to find out Cheap Trick recording a live album. It's not Budokan, obviously. And I go, oh my God, there it is. They recorded it 3 nights. It was just racking my brain, man, listening over and over to a section, trying to make the chronology as perfect as I could.
How many hours of conversations do you think you could guess you have archived with Ed?
In the book, I show the list of interviews. Maybe 30 or 40 or 50 hours. There was a lot. I wish there were more. I wish I'd recorded every second I was with him. You can't do that, right? It becomes unbelievably intrusive. You can't do that. But there were conversations I missed when he would have called. Yeah, I didn't press record. Didn't have the tape player at the ready. But like you said, man, I was together enough to have collected them, to have stored them so the cassettes were still playable, right? Yeah. We all know analog tape dissolves and corrosion goes away. Thank goodness for all of that stuff. I was able to go back to those tapes. None of them broke. Some of the quality was horrible, and I couldn't make out sections, which made me crazy. But, 80% of it was there. So,
but just the fascinating part, Steve, that Eddie trusted you, right? I mean, okay, some of it was like actual interviews, some of it was just small talk, right? But that the bond that developed between the two of you, he wasn't sitting there thinking, oh my God, this guy's strange because he's hitting record on everything we're talking about. He felt that comfort with you. And that was really the importance of this whole book, is you developed a friendship, which led to many, many other things, which you'll eventually talk about.
That's absolutely true. And, it's funny in the book, and there's only been like two people who kind of had problems with it. They go, well, why'd you print that when, that part where Eddie says, don't print this or don't use this? I could only write the book if it was going to be entirely honest. And I say that from the beginning, in portraying as closely and accurately as I could who Edward Van Halen was and who I was. There are moments that I paint a picture of myself. I could have lied. I could have said I never drank with Ed. I never did blow with Ed. I mean, I could have lied and said that. Yeah, I couldn't do that. I wasn't going to write that kind of a book. I could have taken the real easy way out and not printed that little bit where Ed says, don't print this. So no one would have ever thought that is a forbidden interview. They just would have, they wouldn't have had those thoughts like, well, why would you print that if Ed said don't print that? So what they don't understand is the fact that I put in and included don't print this, and now, all these years later, included that. That's how honest I was trying to be. Wasn't trying to be sensational or hurt anybody or rewrite history in any way. I just wanted to present the book and Edward and myself as honestly as possible.
Steve, I have a point on something. Yeah. In 94, I believe it was a guitar player released a special edition, unreleased interviews. And right. Jay Obrecht, is that the pronunciation?
I think it's Jazz Obrecht.
Okay, well, he released an interview, and in that interview, Eddie referred to Steve Rosen as a friend. You were a friend, and for him to even mention you and call you out to another publicist or another writer is amazing. Yeah. A comment on how you felt, you being mentioned in that light, because that's impressive.
It was honestly, and I don't want to get maudlin about it, man, but I read that. I mean, I cried. I thought, wow, that's unbelievable. And the thing that's straight is somebody sent me that clip because I had never seen it. I hadn't been a guitar player for years. I didn't know about that issue, and I read that, and I thought, my God, he really thought that way about me. I mean, you thank your friends and you want to believe your friends, and you do things that friends do, but to hear him say that, like you say, especially to another journalist, was unbelievable. And I have to give props to Jazz for printing that, because he didn't have to put that little bit in his story. And as an aside, Jazz just put up the audio of that interview on his site, Talking Guitars. And so I listened to that, and to hear Edward actually say that was pretty unbelievable. So, yeah, we were friends, and Edward trusted me. And because he trusted me, I mean, I would have never betrayed that trust in 1,000 years, So, yeah, and she knew that. The other thing you have to remember is that when he said that, don't print this, he may have been talking about Michael Anthony or Dave. And at the time, when he said it, 78 or 79 or 80, in the thick of Van Halen and the third and the fourth record, he didn't want me, didn't want anybody knowing what he was saying about Dave or Mike. He loved those guys, and I think we all get that sense. But he was frustrated, you know. So that's another thing that comes out. You know, people get, well, you know, he said, don't print this. I said, yeah, but he said that in 1979. We're now in 2021, and a lot of that is common knowledge. A lot of it's not. But, you know, and a lot of it is personal stuff that, yeah, I've sat on for 17 years. But so you have to understand that a lot of that was talked about in the moment. And yeah, had that stuff come out about Mike or Dave back then, yeah, that could have been pretty disastrous like that.
Any nuggets you could share that you've been sitting on? Because I have some questions.
Yeah, man. Honestly, I think I pretty much laid it all out there. I mean, honestly, there were bits that I thought, my God, do I really want to include this stuff? Because I thought maybe there was a bridge too far, but it's all out there. I don't think that there's one. Honestly, I don't think there's one little bit that I left on a tape that's not on the page. Yeah.
Hey, Steve, I have a couple questions. I mean, maybe getting off track on the book a little. We'll come back. Sure. But, you know, there was several eras of Van Halen in totality, right? You had the rise. They hit their pinnacle in 1984. I am a 14-year-old kid. I couldn't believe it when David Lee Roth leaves. You know, reboot number 2, Sammy comes in. You know, the band is reborn again, hits a second career. You know, Gary Sharon comes in. Sammy comes back in, then leads to the reunion. What were those conversations like with you and Ed at all of those, let's say, turning points of the band? Like, what was talked about when it was like, okay, we got 5 number 1 singles on 1984. We're on top of the world. But, and then there's a but that comes in there. What's the but?
That's a good question. We never got specific in that way. Ed, I mean, I can remember, and I talk about it in the book. As an aside, just real quickly, I can tell you that N-word was happiest in the very beginning of the band. I have to think he was happy in the club days. Obviously, he wanted to make it, you know, every guitar player wanted to branch out. But I think those first couple records, the first 2 records, I think were the best times for him. At least to me, that's what he seemed most content, happiest. 1984, he was very proud of that record. I think Dave leaving, and we talked about that, was, I think that hurt him immensely. He couldn't understand it. I think he felt disrespected. The early days of Sammy, I think he was so happy to have found Sammy. Again, these are, when it's not like Edward asked him, well, Ed, you know, what's, you know, is it going to be different now with Sammy, or you know, are you happy days? I never had those kinds of conversations. I guess I wish I did. So it was more kind of generalities, you know, us talking about things. And he talks about, you know, not particularly being a fan of Sammy's writing, Sammy's solo writing. But he was really happy when Sammy came into the band. By the time that Gary Sharon came in, we had grown actually a little distant by that point. I think he was really anticipating big things with Gary.
In the back of the book, you have pages, an interview with Michael Anthony, his comments, and David Lee Roth and Jimmy Page. But in the section where Michael Anthony was talking about when Dave finally left the band, he was saying that it couldn't have come a day sooner. It was time.
One thing you have to understand is that Michael Anthony said those things to me contemporaneous at the moment, right? It comes out later in Noel's book or Granny's book, and taking nothing away from them. It's common history now. It wasn't when Mike was telling you that stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Mike, and I don't want to put words in Mike's mouth, Mike really, really disliked Dave. And I think that he saw what it was doing to Edward. I saw what it was doing to Ed, you know. I you know, I didn't know Dave that well. Like I said, I'd only interviewed Dave one time. I ran into him probably a couple times. He was always cordial to me. I don't think he gave Edward the respect that Edward deserves, or just a simple acknowledgement that how hard Edward worked for the band. So I think Mike saw all of that too, and Mike was just a lot, I don't know, maybe more vocal than Edward. I mean, Mike just really, he hated that ego that Dave had, and saw what it was doing to Edward. And I saw it too. Man, Ed, he's just so unhappy. I mean, my God, you make an album like 1984, and that's the stuff you're dealing with. I don't know.
Well, that whole thing with Fair Warning, and you wrote in the book that Eddie wrote everything. Those guys did not bring anything to the table. They come off tour from the Women and Children First, and everyone turns around in 1980 and they turn around and look at Eddie and say, "Hey, Eddie, what do you got?" Like it's an endless well. And Ed, you wrote in the book that Eddie stated that he lost weight. He wrote that album in 2 weeks. It's their darkest album. One of the first albums where two things, there were no cover songs, and they really weren't dipping into the old music well. The ideas from, stuff that they cultivated from the old demos and all that.
Yeah.
Tell us about the Fair Warning era and some of those tidbits.
Edward loved that stuff, man. And yeah, he talked about, it was making a set. But I think it was maybe the first time since those early records that he had a chance to push himself, right? All those multiple guitar parts and the layers. I think he wanted to say something to Ted, like, "Ted, look what I could do." The relationship between Ted and Edward, it was strange. I mean, you read the book, and just, kind of being really unhappy with Ted, but always bringing him back, which I could never understand. Obviously, Ted was integral for that, that band. Much more so for Dave, right? He was always Dave's guy. But it's one of the few times when Ed would talk about his playing and go, "Yeah, man, I was happy with that." I thought his playing was just unbelievable. I mean, just incredible. And maybe just left to his own devices, that's what it was. I don't think he was thinking about anything else. Like you say, cover singles, and he was just going to do what he was going to do. It's funny because I don't think he thought of it as a dark album. But I think I characterized the one single, and the one solo, and I forget which song it was. "Man, well, you an angry young man, you did that solo." He kind of laughed because he did, he didn't think of the record as being angry, but I think everybody who listens to it gets that sense that, that's angry, maybe passionate is a better word. But yeah, he was amazing. Yeah, he had to go from that to Diver Down. And there were some good songs on Diver Down. But, Ed was the first one to tell you about, all the covers. I don't know, there were 4 covers, or he said, there were 4 covers too many, or something like that, But, the beginning of the downfall, they certainly changed on Diver Down. That's
Well, the studio dynamic, they had that great idea of releasing Pretty Woman as a carryover, because the band was going to take a little break, and then it gained momentum, and this was the beginning of MTV. They did a video, and that was the seed that started with Lee Roth and the visual that eventually led to that, Dave going solo. But, Eddie wasn't about that. This is... he just was a musician. He didn't even call himself a rock star. Do we call him a recluse, or is he just a simple man that liked to play guitar and keep to his own?
With that, it was It was music first, music second, and music third. And hats off to Dave. That's what Dave brought, right? Even though Edward says that Al had a lot of the, brought ideas to the videos, but that was Dave's oeuvre, right? The on-stage thing, the videos, bigger than life, because Edward was not that person. With every post, yeah, but he was always repulsive, playing music. It's not like he didn't go on a line. I think at a point in time he could, people mocked him. He didn't like that part of it. With Edward, he was one of those guys, yeah, it was always about the guitar. It was always about music. And that, that could cause problems. One, your other band members, is anybody going to work as hard as you? When I say you, I mean Edward. I mean, I don't know if anybody worked as hard. I don't know if Al worked as hard as Edward. He was out there writing and getting the studio together. And when he talks about 5150 as being a tool for the band, he absolutely meant that. And that they didn't get it at all. They were threatened by it. Dave was threatened. Ted was threatened. I'll tell you, man, if I was in a band and my guitar player, thought enough to pay for his own studio, I think I think that's the greatest thing in the world. My God, he loves his band so much he wants to put in his studio. Anyway, marriages, Edward, loved Valerie and everything else, man. But it was music, first and foremost for you. And you have to be a certain type of person. You have to be a certain kind of, person in a relationship with Edward to understand that. And you can up to a point, and then it gets really difficult. I call it the care and feeding of a guitar god, and it's not an easy thing to do. In my once removed way as a friend, I saw that so many times. It's hard. It was hard, man. It's like, you're always going to be second to the music, and when they want to work on the music, you go home. And so, yeah.
Do you think he's passed some of that work ethic down to his son? He's building his career.
I think in a big way. I've never met Wolf. I've never spoken to him. In the book, Edward talks about him, which is probably the first time he's ever spoken to anybody outside of his family, and about his son being a musician, and he plays me those drum tracks. I think Wolf got that big time. Obviously, he got the musicality. Very talented kid. I mean, yeah.
I remember. I think it was when they did that short-lived, we'll call it reunion tour. I think it was 2005 when Sam came back in and they put like a greatest hits with 3 new songs or something. And I remember seeing that show in New Jersey at the Meadowlands Arena. And I guess Wolf had to be about 12. And during Ed's solo, and Ed wasn't in a good place at this time. I remember there were questions of, his sobriety. He was in a weird space. But I remember at the time not even knowing who Wolf was. And he came out on stage and soloed with his dad at 12. And that should just tell you about the work ethic of him and his son, that here's a kid that should be in school, and he's traveling the road across the states in the middle of the summer or wherever it was, so that should tell you something.
Absolutely. And again, I think when Ed, played with that little, Wolf channeling John Bonham, I think he was 11. I heard this, this somebody playing these drums on the tape, the tape I'm listening to, Edward recording. I thought, my God, that kid is 11 years old. It's pretty amazing. And the other interesting thing is, I did ask him way before he had Wolf, would you want your child, to be in music? And that's just, that's what he wants to do. I mean, look, growing up in, as a son of Edward Van Halen, I mean, was Wolf going to be anything else? Yeah. I mean, sure, he could have been an engineer or a pilot, but I mean, come on. I mean, the chances of him being a musician were probably pretty high, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Very talented kid. Very talented.
Now, listeners, this conversation, first and foremost, it exemplifies that there's just so much in this book, and a lot of these stories is colored, again, by Steve's penmanship, if you will. It's just, it goes on and on and on. But in the back, you have some testimonials from some famous rock stars, and Jimmy Page had some comments. And I got out of this, were these backhanded compliments to Ed? And Eddie mentioned that him and Alex back in like 73 or 74 would go to the Forum and see Zeppelin, and he'd watch Jimmy Page like do pull-offs and hammer-ons. And then in these comments, Jimmy Page was like, well, I don't play that way, whatever they're called. And I don't know. What's your take on these Page comments?
Well, I can tell you exactly what it is because I remember that very clearly. So I was in Daytona Beach interviewing Page for Guitar World. And again, I notate in the book, I did not interview Jimmy specifically for the book. Those other interviews that you read in there, for the most part, maybe Ozzy wasn't. I interviewed all those people specifically for the book that I was working on at the time, which was Edward's authorized biography, which, as we all know, sadly never happened. So I was interviewing all those people specifically for the book. With Page, the interview had gone so badly, and I was like, he would yell at me. I'd ask him an innocuous question, and he'd go, "What the fuck do you want to know that for?" And the question was like, first question of the interview, and now I'll get to your point, Dope, John. I asked him, so it must be, this is during the Firm, it must be, way different working with Paul Rogers as opposed to Robert Plant. He goes, well, what the fuck do you think? Of course it's going to be different. What the fuck do you think? And this is the first question on my mouth. I thought, it was an interesting question. I thought he was going to get into, writing with them and their lyrics and the personality. But no, it's like, in his mind, I don't know what it was, man. He was insulted, or it went downhill from there. I had a screaming migraine headache. I almost threw up on his fucking shoes because it was so tense in there. So at a point in time, I said, fuck you. I started asking him questions about Eddie Van Halen. And I was almost like prodding him with the stick. Come on, shit brain.
Yeah.
That's when he said, well, yeah, and I know you're friends with Eddie, and that's when he makes that back kind of compliment. Yeah, I can't smile like Edward, and I can't play that stuff. But yeah, you're right. Ed ostensibly had seen Page do, the single kind of tapping on the Heartbreaker solo, right?
Yeah.
Which at the time was amazing. I mean, don't get me wrong. Page is amazing. I love Zeppelin, but the guy was impossible to talk to. So yes, those comments were backhanded. I don't think he thought much of Edward's playing. I truly don't. And the thing that's weird, and I've never heard anybody else bring this up, it may have been a Guitar World issue, where there's the cover with and Jimmy Page, and all of a sudden they're best friends, and Edward's passing. I mean, I'm sure that Jimmy had some words, and I'm sure that Jimmy was hurt when Edward passed, and I'm sure it was a part of him that recognized who he was. But I think, in the scope of things, I don't think Ed meant that much to him. So yes, I believe every word out of Page's mouth was a backhanded compliment. I think he was just getting mad at me for bringing his name up over and over.
Was this before or after you spent 11 days on the road with him?
Oh, this is way after. This is 86. That was 77. And that's the other thing. It's like I walk in, I think, well, look, Page has been interviews with hundreds of journalists, but only one wrote a cover story in Guitar Player magazine in 77. And I think I said something, hey, Jimmy, we met in 77. Nothing. I thought, that's not a good sign, you know. So yeah, he didn't remember that at all.
You're on the road with Zeppelin for 11 days and 77. Man, that's
that cover story and guitar player. Yeah, that was pretty fantastic.
They were crazy then. Was that Fish Story era and all that shit? Or you see anything crazy?
Yep.
Ah, Jesus.
Steve, it brings you back to your point at the top of the show about all these, fake people that claim to know Jeff Beck.
Exactly.
Like, I know it was Jimmy Page's birthday a week or two ago, and you saw all these people wishing him a happy birthday. I'm guessing you didn't send him a card at this point.
I didn't know, and had I known, no, I wouldn't have sent him a card. The point in time I was thinking, hey, you know what? What if I reach out to Page and have him write like a little blurb on the back cover? Yeah, Steve Rosen, that fuckhead, he asked me about Eddie Van Halen too much, Yeah, look. I just need to say, I love Zeppelin. I thought the first Zeppelin record was life-changing. I'd never heard anything like that. I think Jimmy Page is amazing. But that being said, he's not an easy person to interview. Right. So I want that on the record, guys, okay?
Hey, they all can't be Richie Blackmore, right?
Yeah, Richie Blackmore.
So, Steve, I'm a big Deep Purple guy.
Me too.
I follow their present band with Steve Morse and now new guitar player Simon McBride coming on board. But there's something in the book where you talk about this 1979 show, a Rainbow concert at the Long Beach Arena, and you secured tickets and passes to get Eddie to meet Richie. And I think the history goes that maybe Richie kind of slagged him off or whatever. Tell us a good story about that one.
Let me back up just a little bit. I knew that Edward was a big Blackmore fan. When I heard the first time I heard the first Van Halen record, and I write about it infamously in the book, not being blown away by it, my first reaction was, yeah, man, that's that Edward Van Halen guy. Man, he's a good guitar player. This sounds like Deep Purple sped up. I just got a sense of Deep Purple, those fast boogies, and kind of the vibrato thing. That was my first instinct. So I always had a sense that Ed was a Blackmore fan. We talked about him that night when we first met. What I did not know was that Edward had met Richie at the Whiskey. And I forget, this is going back way early. This would be like before I met Edward. 73, 74 maybe. Richie was hanging out at the Rainbow where he hung out a lot. Edward was there. He saw Blackmore, walks over to Richie, who was there with John Bonham, and they both treated Ed like shit. I didn't know that. Edward never told that to me. So come 78, I had interviewed Richie the year before for the cover guitar player, so I thought, my God, how amazing would it be if I could be the one to introduce Richie Blackmore to Edward? I thought, it's historic, man. Yeah, I'll be the guy who brought these two guys together. So I got tickets, I got passes. I said, Ed, Van Halen. Ed, the Rainbow is playing Long Beach Arena, and you want to go? But yeah, man, good. I said, I got passes, And I don't remember if I said, man, I can introduce it. I don't think I did. I think it was just, we'll go to the show. So we go, and that was the night when Richie was in a mood, and she went on second, and Randy Hansen, who did like this Hendrix thing, did it very well, headline. And I thought, my God, that is weird. I've never seen a headliner go on second and have an opening act or the middle act go on last. So we see the show, and I don't think either of us was particularly blown away, to be honest. It's a little hard to remember. But afterwards, it was like an after-show party at the Queen Mary, which is just a short drive away from Long Beach Harbor there. So we go, and I'm looking around, and I'm thinking, if Richie Blackmore went on second. Something must have happened. I thought Ritchie could be in one of his moods, because I'd experienced a Ritchie Blackmore mood. I thought, oh my God, I'm about to introduce these guys, but the die was cast. So we're in there, and I'm looking around for Ritchie, and I don't see him, and I'm thinking, okay, Ed doesn't know that I want to introduce him. Ed's just here. We're going to have a drink and we had to leave. And then I look over and I see Ritchie, and I think Edward kind of saw him at the same time. And so I kind of walk over, and I see Ritchie looking at me, and I think he kind of, remembers me, because it was a guitar player cover. You have to remember, guitar player back in the 70s was the Bible. If you were a guitar player, you wanted to be in Guitar Player magazine, and to be on a cover was like, being kissed by God. I mean, that was special. So I think Ritchie remembered that. So we walk over, and, again, I try to remember, I think Ritchie may have shook my hand, and Ed's kind of standing there. And before I have a chance to, Ritchie Blackmore, Edward Van Halen, Edward Van Halen, Ritchie Blackmore, Ritchie kind of, gives him that snide look that Ritchie gives, and looks at him and goes, hey, I know you. You play guitar, right? You're a guitar player. And I'm gasping for breath. I'm thinking, oh my God, what did I do? What have I done, man? I've embarrassed Edward horribly. I've embarrassed myself. I go, Ed is going to be furious. He's going to scream at me. And right was so one that it was like me meeting Ritchie the first time, meeting my hero, and having him treat me like fucking worsted. It was like, oh, it's just, but this is even worse because Edward, this is 78. It's not like Ed is an unknown entity, right? It's like, it's the second record. It's like on the first record. They've been on tour. Ritchie knows full well who he is. Obviously, he knows who he is. We also know who he is as a player, as a technician, as a guy who plays a Strat, as a guy who uses the whammy bar. So it was all those things. So it's like I felt horrible. Like I say, I don't think Edward brought it up on the way home. I know Ed was hurt by it, but Ed just, I don't know if he showed those kinds of things. Much later in a conversation with Jazz, Ed brings it up. In fact, not that much. Sorry. In that same conversation, Ed brings up about meeting. I met Ritchie, and he kind of dismissed from that. Not that he would, but Edward didn't remember me introducing him to Blackmore. He doesn't mention my name in that story, though he does, cite me as a friend. But you would think that he would have remembered that moment anyway. But he does remember, being insulted by Ritchie. Though he doesn't say, oh, yeah, I was hurt or embarrassed. Edward was really sure of himself. Everyone had this confidence. It wasn't ego and it wasn't being cocky, but he knew how good he was. And even if he were to be insulted by someone like Blackmore, it wasn't going to affect him like it would have affected some normal, guitar player. Anyway, that's my feeling.
So Ritchie was cold, if you will. Jimmy Page had his problems. There's some talk of late about the relationship between Eddie Van Halen and Randy Rhoads. You ever share any thoughts on Randy? Because recently Rudy Sarzo came out and said, oh, Eddie had a problem with Randy. Ozzy mumbled something. Or is this stuff that's just blown out of proportion with media and stuff?
Honestly, John, I wish I had enough insight to speak, truly insightfully about that. The only time I ever brought up Randy was just in that one conversation. I think we were maybe talking about local guitar players, what the word about Randy Rhoads. And everyone, he's a good guitar player. He's cool because he admits to being influenced by me, the guitar players say that. I wish I had pursued it more. It's one of those questions I wish I had gone after more. I've heard from people that there was some animosity there. A good friend of mine who knew Randy pretty well, had taken lessons from Randy, said that, yeah, there was some real animosity between the two of them. And I don't know where it came from. I never saw Edward being insecure in that way ever around any other guitar player. He may have been insecure in, maybe his own music or, maybe the band or the, the in a relationship with the guys in the band. But I never heard him say, oh my God, Bob Smith, it's so amazing. I wish I could play like that. He never spoke like that. Mm-hmm. So was there real animosity there, or was it just simple jealousy between two gunslingers? I thought what Ozzy said was really interesting in the quote. And again, this was not, I didn't interview Ozzy for the book. This is, I forget when I did that interview with Ozzy. Ozzy said, well, if Edward had been an Ozzy and, Randy, playing with the Van Halen guys, maybe we all be talking about Randy. I mean, it was an interesting sort of analogy that he made. But I never heard Ozzy say one mean word about Edward. I mean, for all I know. But so I don't know.
Steve, I'm jumping onto that topic. It's a perfect segue for me because I was always curious. There was a couple points in the career of Eddie Van Halen where, he did collaborate with others, and I'm a big Black Sabbath fan. I know he did play on the 1994 Black Sabbath album Cross Purposes on the song Evil Eye. And we talked to singer Tony Martin from that era earlier in 2022, and he mentioned that there was quite a writing session that happened around that time, 93, 94, with Eddie and Tony. And I'm just curious, from your history, because there was also the rivalry on the Never Say Die tour in 78, where Van Halen blew Sabbath off the stage. But I gather from, different articles and interviews I've read that Eddie and Tony were, unlike Blackmore, they were collaborators, friends. And throw Brian May into that mix. I know Eddie did some stuff with Brian May. Yeah. So talk about some of the positive collaborations.
To be honest, I wasn't that aware of the Sabbath collaboration.
Okay.
I'm trying to think if Tony's name ever came up. I remember once referencing one of the Van Halen songs, and I said it sounded like some riff from Sabbath. No, worked it. Anyway, that was the wrong thing to say. Yeah, that was put a foot in my mouth. But no, he loved Tony, and I think. Look, I don't know why. I've met Tony many, many times. He is the sweetest guy. All those guys, all the guys at Sabbath, Ozzy, whatever, however he's portrayed, he's nothing like that. He's a freaking funny guy, very sweet guy. Tony's an amazingly nice guy, quiet. And Ozzy talked about, that they did get blown up by Van Halen, Ozzy and this or that. But I know that Edward did love Tony a lot. The Brian May thing, same thing. I think Brian, and I saw it when I write a little bit about the NAMM show in New Orleans when they jammed, and then later they kind of hung out and they were just like jamming in the room. I mean, I watched Brian May. It was like you or me. Well, it was like me watching Edward, play guitar in my living room. Just, you can't believe this guy's playing like that. Brian would watch Edward in that same way. And there's a comment where Edward says, "Yeah, we might do another record, and I'll play keyboards." And Brian says, "Oh yeah, like sure, like I'll play guitar for it." I mean, it was just that kind of absolute awe of one another, because I think Ed really loved Brian's playing. So yeah, that was a collaboration. I mean, the Starfleet album, Starfleet project. I mean, it wasn't like the most brilliant thing in the world. They hadn't rehearsed. It was kind of a jam. But I mean, for what it was good. I mean, Edward actually played on a fair number of records.
Nicolette Larson and
Nicolette Larson. Obviously the Michael Jackson record, which is not really a collaboration, more a, coming in to do a guest solo. He actually did a solo on a Tim Bogert record. He loved Tim's bass playing. Tim was his favorite bass player. One of Tim's solo records. And there were some others. He wasn't a big collaborator. I mean, he just didn't do that kind of thing, And, we all know that he talks about doing that record, bringing in different people, Phil Collins and Pete Townsend. And I think him working with Pete Townsend could have been amazing because of Pete's writing and what they do. And I always heard kind of a Townsend-esque thing in Edward's kind of that rhythm stuff he did. But, so that never got past the talk stage. But, I think with that, it was just always about his own music.
Steve, I want to thank you for the time today. And before Verno closes this, I just wanted to ask you one more thing. Your conversations with Eddie sort of started fading out in the early 2000s or so. Was it something specific that happened, or how long did your friendship go, and why sort of did it just end? And had you been talking to him towards his private years and eventually his passing?
I don't want to give specifically the book away, and I try to answer it in the book. He started changing mid-90s, I think. And I don't know. I try to figure out what it was. Maybe the marriage, and I don't know that for a fact. He never talked about that because by the mid-90s, we didn't have those kinds of conversations. When I characterize as our twilight tape conversations, those very intimate talks and dialogue, I don't know. I mean, maybe I should have pushed him harder, or maybe I should have not let it go. But it's like, I don't know. But something was changing. By 2000, that's when I went out and I did that DVD, the early years. And he was really unhappy with that, as we all know. I don't know what happened. I mean, I give as close an explanation as I can come up with. We know after 2003 is when she went through horrible, horrible times. And we've seen those pictures of him and the hair and the samurai knot and the clothes. And, part of me is happy I wasn't around then. Maybe that's a chicken shit way to be. I mean, because I hadn't seen him for years. So I didn't know. I didn't know what he looked like. I didn't know how he was dressing. Every time I ever saw him, like, God, he looked amazing. But I also think, and I don't know this at all. Maybe, he was diagnosed with cancer in 2000. Maybe, I don't know this at all. I'm only surmising, but maybe he was not, maybe there was some mild, he wasn't feeling well going back to the 90s, and I don't know that at all. I don't want to put that out there as a rumor. I'm just trying to figure out and understand what happened, right? There was no record label, I think, by then, or they were being dropped. I think the marriage was not working too well. Maybe the drugs thing was happening.
It was a bad time. It was people change, people grow up. I think you answered it well, Steve. I think you answered it well.
I'm this person that takes everything to heart. Everything that happens is my fault. What did I do? Oh my God, that girlfriend doesn't like me anymore, even though she was cheating on me 15 days after we first met. Oh, it's my fault. I didn't have enough money. I wasn't, man, trust me, I have enough guilt for the whole world. So I thought, what did I do, man? What can I have done to this guy for him to have done that, And look, I may have done something that I can never remember where he wouldn't want to be friends anymore, but the way that it ended and the things he said to me, there's no way. Trust me, those things I would remember.
Well, what you did do is you created one hell of a book. And again, congratulations. The book, Tone Chaser, Understanding Edward, my 26-year journey with Edward Van Halen. Walt, any parting shots?
This was an amazing conversation. You said so much insight. We'd love to have you again, talk other musicians, other artists. It would be great to have you back on someday. So thank you.
Anytime, guys. Thank you for your time. And I hate to put in a plug, but paypal.me/tonechaser if you want the book. And it's out there. And guys, thank you so much for your wonderful questions and, having me on. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, Steve. And happy birthday, Eddie. We miss you and love you.
Yes, we do.
See you, Steve. Take care, friend.
Thanks, Steve.
See you guys.
Metal for Life.
Thank you for listening to Metal Mayhem ROC. Check out our website at metalmayhemroc.com for information on podcasts, archives, links to all our live radio shows, and all sorts of info. Please like, follow, and share with everyone, even your non-metal friends. And always remember to keep it heavy.